Reyes tucked a strand of graying hair behind her ear and glanced at the clock on her office wall. 4:30, just 30 more minutes before she could pack up her things and head home. The spreadsheets on her computer screen blurred as her mind wandered to what she might cook for dinner. Maybe pasta. Her son Luis always appreciated a good pasta dish after basketball practice. 20 years she had worked as an administrative assistant at Patterson & Sons law firm. 20 years of typing memos, scheduling appointments, and filing paperwork. It wasn't that Elena disliked her job. The people were nice enough, the pay was decent, and the hours allowed her to be home for Luis in the evenings. But sometimes, in quiet moments like this one, she wondered if this was all there would ever be. The ping of an incoming email broke her reverie. Elena, probably Mr. Patterson asking for those files to be reorganized again. With a small sigh, Elena clicked on the notification. But it wasn't from her boss. The sender was unfamiliar. Regional Symphony Orchestra. Her brow furrowed as she opened it. Had she subscribed to their newsletter? Elena enjoyed classical music, sure, but she'd never attended one of their performances. The tickets were always too expensive on her single mother's budget. Open auditions, the email proclaimed in bold letters. The Regional Symphony Orchestra is seeking new vocal talent for our upcoming season. All experience levels welcome. Elena almost deleted it, assuming it was sent to her by mistake, but her finger hesitated over the delete button as she read the final line. Sometimes the most extraordinary voices are found in the most ordinary places. Something stirred in her chest, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. Before Luis, before her failed marriage, before the responsibilities of adulthood had piled up and buried certain dreams so deep, she'd almost forgotten they existed. She had loved to sing once. Really loved it. Her thoughts drifted to her childhood home, to her grandmother humming folk songs in the kitchen, teaching Elena to hold notes that seemed to float in the air like visible things. To high school, where her choir teacher had urged her to apply for a music scholarship. "You have a gift, Elena," Mrs. Winters had said. "Don't waste it." But then came graduation and her father's illness and the need for a steady paycheck. Music became something she enjoyed in private, singing in the shower, joining the small church choir, humming to herself as she washed dishes. Nothing serious. Nothing that would ever amount to anything. Elena looked back at the email. The auditions were this Saturday. She would be free. Luis was spending the weekend with his father in the next town over. "Don't be ridiculous," she muttered to herself, shaking her head. She was 42 years old. The other people auditioning would be young, professionally trained, confident. What would she even sing? How would she prepare in just 3 days? Yet as she shut down her computer and gathered her things to leave, the thought wouldn't let go. It followed her onto the bus, sat beside her as she chopped vegetables for dinner, and kept her company as she folded laundry after Luis went to bed. That night, after making sure her son was asleep, Elena stood in front of her bathroom mirror. She looked at herself, really looked, for what felt like the first time in years. The lines around her eyes had deepened. Her dark hair showed streaks of silver at the temples. She was not the young woman who had once dreamed of singing on a stage. "Just try," she whispered to her reflection. "Just once." She opened her mouth and began to sing softly an old lullaby her grandmother had taught her. Her voice was rusty from disuse, catching on certain notes, but beneath the roughness was something still pure and clear. The next morning, Elena called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. She spent the day searching through old boxes in her storage closet until she found what she was looking for, a folder of sheet music from her high school days. Among the pages was Ave Maria, a piece she had performed for a spring concert her senior year. Mrs. Winters had cried when Elena sang it. For the next 2 days, Elena practiced whenever she could. Early in the morning before Luis woke up, during her lunch break at work, singing softly in her car in the parking lot. Late at night after the apartment had gone quiet. By Saturday morning, her nerves were stretched to breaking point. She stood in front of her closet, suddenly realizing she had nothing appropriate to wear for an audition. What did people even wear to these things? After trying on and discarding several outfits, she settled on a simple blue dress she usually saved for special occasions at church. It wasn't fancy, but it was the best she had. "Mom, you look nice," Luis said when she emerged from her bedroom. At 13, he wasn't usually generous with compliments. "Where are you going?" Elena hesitated. She hadn't told anyone about the audition, afraid that speaking it aloud would make her realize how foolish she was being. But looking at her son's curious face, she felt a sudden need for honesty. "I'm going to an audition," she said, "for the Regional Symphony Orchestra." Luis's eyebrows shot up. "Like to sing? For real?" Elena nodded, feeling her cheeks warm with embarrassment. "It's just an open call. They probably won't even listen to everyone who shows up." "That's awesome," Luis said, surprising her. "You should record it so I can see." The simplicity of his support brought unexpected tears to her eyes. "I don't think they allow recordings," she said, blinking rapidly. "But I'll tell you all about it when you get back from your dad's." The symphony hall was larger and grander than Elena had imagined. Made of smooth stone and glass, it rose like a modern cathedral in the center of the arts district. Elena had passed by it many times but had never gone inside. Now, clutching her sheet music to her chest, she joined the line of people waiting outside the entrance. Most were young, as she had expected. College students, she guessed, with their confident postures and casual conversations about repertoires and techniques. A few nodded politely as she took her place in line, but most didn't seem to notice her. First time? The question came from a woman standing behind her, perhaps in her late 30s. She had warm brown skin and wore a bright yellow scarf that contrasted beautifully with her deep blue dress. Elena nodded, grateful for the friendly face. "Is it that obvious?" The woman laughed. "Only because you look exactly how I felt at my first audition 3 years ago. Like you might throw up or run away, or possibly both at the same time. That's actually a pretty accurate description of how I feel," Elena admitted with a small laugh. "I'm Priya," the woman said, extending her hand. "Cellist. We're trying to be anyway. Still get rejected more often than not, but it doesn't sting quite as much as it used to." "Elena, and I guess I'm a singer. Or I used to be. It's been a long time." "The voice never really leaves you," Priya said with a warm smile. "It just waits for you to find it again." The line began to move, and Elena's heart raced as they were ushered inside. The interior of the symphony hall was even more impressive than the outside. High ceilings, polished wood, and a sense of reverent quiet that reminded Elena of a church. They were directed to a large rehearsal room where about 30 other hopefuls sat in chairs arranged in a semicircle. At the front of the room, a small panel of people sat behind a table, reviewing papers and speaking quietly amongst themselves. "That's the selection committee," Priya whispered, nodding toward the table. "And the man in the middle is Maestro Victor Keller. He's the new musical director. Bit of a hardliner from what I've heard." Elena studied the man. He was perhaps in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses. His posture was rigid, his expression severe as he flipped through pages in front of him. A woman with a clipboard approached the center of the semicircle. "Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming to our open auditions today. We'll be calling you up one by one. Please state your name and what you'll be performing before you begin." Elena's hands grew clammy as the audition started. The level of talent was intimidating. A young man played a violin piece that made Elena's heart ache with its beauty. A woman around Priya's age sang an aria that filled the room with her powerful soprano. Even when performers made small mistakes, their technical skills were evident. Elena Reyes, the woman with the clipboard, called. For a moment, Elena couldn't move. This had been a mistake. She didn't belong here among these talented people. She should just apologize and leave. "That's you," Priya whispered, giving her a gentle nudge. "You've got this." On legs that felt like they might give way beneath her, Elena walked to the center of the room. The sheet music trembled in her hands as she faced the selection committee. Maestro Keller looked up, his expression impassive behind his glasses. "My name is Elena Reyes," she said, her voice barely audible even to her own ears. She cleared her throat and tried again. "I'll be singing Ave Maria." As she took a deep breath and began to sing, Elena closed her eyes. She thought of her grandmother in the kitchen, of her son's encouraging words that morning, of all the years she had let her dreams sleep while life carried her in a different direction. And somewhere in the midst of those thoughts, she found her voice, imperfect, untrained, but entirely her own. When she opened her eyes again, she found Maestro Keller watching her with an unreadable expression. The room fell silent as she finished the last note. "Thank you, Ms. Reyes," the woman with the clipboard said after a moment. "We'll be in touch with all applicants by the end of next week." As Elena returned to her seat, her heart pounding, She wasn't sure if she had done well or poorly. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt truly vibrantly alive. Elena couldn't focus at work the following Monday. Her mind kept returning to the audition, replaying every note, every breath, every moment when her voice had wavered. Had she made a complete fool of herself? Or had there been some small glimmer of talent that the selection committee might have recognized? Earth to Elena, her coworker Diane said, waving a hand in front of her face. You've been staring at that same email for 10 minutes. Elena blinked and straightened in her chair. Sorry, just distracted today. Hot date over the weekend? Diane asked with a teasing smile. Elena laughed. Hardly. Just tried something new and I'm waiting to see how it turned out. The week crawled by. Elena checked her email obsessively, jumping every time her phone buzzed with a notification. By Friday afternoon, she had convinced herself that she hadn't made the cut. Why would they choose her, an untrained administrative assistant, when they had so many talented musicians to pick from? She was heating up leftover spaghetti for Luis's dinner when her phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Hello, she answered, wedging the phone between her ear and shoulder as she stirred the pasta. Is this Elena Reyes? A crisp female voice asked. Yes, this is she. This is Barbara Chen from the Regional Symphony Orchestra. I'm calling to inform you that the selection committee would like to hear you again. The spoon slipped from Elena's fingers, clattering against the pot. I'm sorry, what? We'd like you to come in for a second audition, Barbara repeated. This Tuesday at 6 p.m., can you make it? Elena's mind raced. Tuesday at 6 p.m.? She would have to ask Mrs. Gonzalez from downstairs to watch Luis, maybe pick him up from basketball practice. Ms. Reyes? Are you there? Yes. Yes, I can make Tuesday at 6 p.m., Elena said quickly. Good. Please prepare 2 pieces this time, the one you performed at the open audition and something more challenging. Maestro Keller will want to test your range. After hanging up, Elena stood motionless in her kitchen, the pasta forgotten. They wanted to hear her again. Out of all the people who had auditioned, they had chosen her for a callback. She was still standing there when Luis walked in, dropping his backpack on the floor with a thud. Mom, are you okay? Something's burning. The pasta sauce had started to stick to the bottom of the pot. Elena quickly turned off the burner. I'm fine. Better than fine, actually. I got a call back for my audition. Luis's face broke into a wide grin. For real? That's awesome. He threw his arms around her in a rare display of teenage affection. I knew you'd make it. His confidence in her brought tears to her eyes. When had her son grown so supportive, so mature? It's just a second audition, she cautioned. It doesn't mean I'll get a spot. But they liked you enough to want to hear more, Luis pointed out. That's huge, Mom. Over the weekend, Elena practiced until her throat felt raw. She stuck with Ave Maria as her first piece. It was the one she knew best, the one that felt most natural in her voice. For her second piece, after hours of deliberation, she chose O mio babino caro from the opera Gianni Schicchi. It was ambitious, perhaps too ambitious, but it had always moved her when she heard it performed. Tuesday evening arrived too quickly. This time, Elena dressed more carefully. A dark green dress that brought out the warmth in her brown eyes, a small pendant necklace that had belonged to her grandmother. Luis gave her a thumbs up as she headed out the door. Break a leg, Mom, he called. But not actually, because that would be bad. The symphony hall seemed even more imposing the second time around. Instead of the rehearsal room, Elena was directed to a small auditorium where a grand piano stood on the stage. A few people were already seated in the front row, Barbara Chen, whom Elena recognized from her phone call, 2 other people she didn't know, and Maestro Victor Keller, looking as stern as he had during the open audition. Ms. Reyes, Barbara greeted her with a professional smile. Thank you for coming. Please take the stage when you're ready. Elena's legs felt like lead as she walked up the steps to the stage. The auditorium, though small, seemed vast from where she stood, the stage lights warm on her face. She handed her sheet music to the piano accompanist, a young man with kind eyes who gave her an encouraging nod. Whenever you're ready, he whispered. Elena took a deep breath and looked out at the selection committee. I'll begin with Ave Maria, she said, pleased that her voice sounded steadier than she felt. She sang better than she had at the first audition. The week of practice had smoothed some of the roughness from her voice, and the acoustics in the auditorium lifted and carried her notes in a way the rehearsal room had not. As she finished, she saw Barbara Chen lean over to whisper something to the woman beside her. "And your second piece?" Maestro Keller asked, his voice cutting through the moment. His expression gave away nothing. "O mio bambino caro," Elena replied, nodding to the accompanist. This piece was harder. Much harder. It required control she wasn't sure she possessed, emotion she wasn't sure she could convey. But as the piano introduction played, Elena closed her eyes and thought of Luis, of her love for him, of how she would do anything to give him a good life. The aria was about a daughter pleading with her father, but love was love, and Elena had plenty to draw from. She was halfway through when she missed a note, not badly, but noticeably. Her voice faltered for just a moment before she found her place again. But that brief stumble seemed to break some invisible tension in the room. Maestro Keller sighed loudly and held up his hand. "Stop, stop," he said, his voice sharp with irritation. The piano cut off abruptly. Elena stood frozen on the stage, her heart pounding. Maestro Keller removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. "Ms. Reyes, how long have you been training?" I haven't, not formally," Elena admitted. "I sang in high school and—" "High school," he repeated flatly. "And you thought that qualified you to audition for a professional symphony orchestra?" The coldness in his voice made Elena flinch. "The email said all experience levels were welcome," she said quietly. "Yes, all experience levels of trained musicians," he said, each word precise and cutting. "Not hobbyists who sing in the shower." Barbara Chen cleared her throat. "Victor," but the maestro continued as if she hadn't spoken. "Your pitch is inconsistent. Your breath control is non-existent. And your Italian pronunciation?" He shook his head. "I don't understand why you're wasting our time." Each word felt like a physical blow. Elena stood under the hot stage lights, humiliation washing over her in waves. She thought of all the hours she had practiced, of Luis's proud face when she told him about the callback, of the hope that had begun to flicker to life inside her. "I'm sorry," she managed to say, her voice barely audible. "What was that?" Maestro Keller asked. Elena raised her chin slightly. "I said I'm sorry for wasting your time." She was surprised to find her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. "Thank you for the opportunity." She turned to the accompanist. "And thank you for your patience." With as much dignity as she could muster, Elena walked off the stage. She could hear Barbara Chen saying something in a low, angry voice to Maestro Keller, but the words didn't register. All she wanted was to get out of the building before she broke down completely. She had almost reached the exit when someone called her name. "Ms. Reyes." "Elena, wait!" Elena turned to see an older woman hurrying toward her. She had been sitting with the selection committee, though Elena couldn't recall her name being mentioned. "I'm Josephine Torres," the woman said, slightly out of breath. "I'm the vocal director." "I really should go," Elena said, desperately trying to hold back tears. "Please, just a moment." Josephine's eyes were kind, her expression genuinely apologetic. What Maestro Keller said in there, it was completely unprofessional and unkind. Elena shook her head. "But he wasn't wrong, was he?" "I don't belong here." "That's not true," Josephine said firmly. "You have a remarkable natural tone. Yes, you lack technical training, but that can be learned. What you have, that color in your voice, that emotional connection, that can't be taught." A tear slipped down Elena's cheek despite her efforts. "Thank you for saying that, but I think we both know I made a mistake coming here." Josephine hesitated, then reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. "Take this. A friend of mine, Greta Novak, is a retired opera singer. She gives private lessons sometimes for students she finds interesting." She pressed the card into Elena's hand. "Call her. Tell her I sent you." Elena looked down at the card, then back at Josephine's earnest face. "Why would you do this for me?" "Because 30 years ago I was you," Josephine said simply. "And someone did it for me." Elena walked home slowly, her emotions a tangled mess. The humiliation of Maestro Keller's dismissal still burned hot and painful, but underneath it was something else. A small, stubborn flame that refused to be extinguished. She thought of Josephine's kind words, of the card now tucked safely in her purse. As she neared her apartment building, Elena made a decision. She would allow herself this one night to cry, to feel the sting of rejection fully. But tomorrow she would call the number on the card. Because if there was one thing Elena Reyes was not, it was a quitter. And she was not done singing yet. Elena stared at the business card for the 5th time that morning. turning it over in her hands as she sat at her kitchen table. The elegant script read Greta Novak vocal instructor followed by a phone number. Nothing more. 3 days had passed since the disastrous audition. 3 days of going through the motions at work, of forcing smiles for Luis, of replaying Maestro Keller's cutting words in her mind whenever she had a quiet moment. The shame still burned, but something else had begun to take its place. A quiet, steady determination. Luis walked into the kitchen, backpack slung over one shoulder. "You gonna call her?" he asked, nodding at the card in Elena's hand. Elena looked up, surprised. She hadn't told Luis about the vocal director's parting gift. "How did you know about this?" He shrugged, reaching past her for an apple from the fruit bowl. "You've been staring at that card for days like it might bite you." He took a bite of the apple. "So, are you?" Elena sighed. "I don't know, Luis. Private lessons probably cost a fortune. And after what happened at the audition—" "Mom," Luis said, his voice unexpectedly serious. "You always tell me not to give up when something's hard. That's like your whole thing." He gestured with the apple. "So why is it different when it's you?" Elena looked at her son, really looked at him, and felt a rush of something like pride mixed with embarrassment. When did he become so wise? "You're right," she said softly. "I should practice what I preach." She picked up her phone. "Okay, I'll call. But don't get your hopes up. This woman probably has a waiting list a mile long." Luis grinned. "That's the spirit." Super optimistic. He headed for the door, then paused. "I've got basketball until 5. See you for dinner." After he left, Elena took a deep breath and dialed the number on the card. She almost hoped it would go to voicemail, but after 3 rings, a woman answered. Greta Novak speaking. The voice was accented, Eastern European maybe, and surprisingly strong for someone Elena assumed must be elderly. "Hello, Ms. Novak. My name is Elena Reyes. Josephine Torres from the Regional Symphony gave me your number." She thought you might be willing to give me voice lessons. There was a pause then. "Josephine sent you?" "Interesting. She doesn't give out my number often." Another pause. "Tell me, why do you want lessons?" The question caught Elena off guard. She had expected questions about her experience, her training, not her motivation. Elena hesitated, then decided honesty was the only approach. "I auditioned for the symphony. Twice, actually. The second time, Maestro Keller, well, he made it very clear I wasn't good enough." "Victor Keller," Greta said flatly. "That man has perfect pitch and no heart. Not a good combination in music." She made a dismissive sound. "What did Josephine say about your voice?" "She said I had a remarkable natural tone. And emotional connection." Elena felt strange repeating the compliment as if she were bragging. "Josephine doesn't exaggerate," Greta said. "Come to my home tomorrow at noon. We'll see what you're made of." Before Elena could respond, Greta had given her an address and hung up. Elena sat stunned for a moment, the phone still in her hand. That was it? No questions about her background? No discussion of fees? Just come over? The next day was Saturday, so Elena didn't have to worry about work. She dropped Luis off at his friend's house for a video game marathon, promising to pick him up by 5. Then she drove to the address Greta had given her, a small house in one of the older neighborhoods of the city. The yard was neat but not fussy, with beds of practical herbs rather than ornamental flowers. Elena had barely knocked when the door swung open to reveal a tall, angular woman with silver hair cropped close to her head. She wore simple black pants and a crimson sweater that somehow managed to look elegant rather than casual. Her face was deeply lined, but her blue eyes were sharp and alert. "Elena Reyes," she said, not a question but a statement. "Come in." Elena followed her into a living room dominated by a baby grand piano. The walls were covered with framed photographs and concert posters, some yellowed with age. A large picture window looked out onto a small garden in the backyard. "Sit," Greta instructed, gesturing to the piano bench. She remained standing, studying Elena with an intensity that made her want to fidget. "Tell me your story." The short version. So Elena did. She told Greta about singing in high school, about setting music aside for practical concerns, about the open audition email that had rekindled something long dormant, about Luis and his unexpected support, about Maestro Keller's cruel dismissal. Greta listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. When Elena finished, she nodded once. "Sing for me," she said. "Something simple that you know well." Without the accompaniment of a piano, without sheet music to guide her, Elena felt more exposed than she had at either audition. But she took a breath and sang Amazing Grace, a hymn she had sung at church so many times she could probably perform it in her sleep. Greta closed her eyes as she listened. When Elena finished, the older woman was silent for a long moment. "Josephine was right," she finally said. "Your technical skills are non-existent. Your breath control is poor. You have no idea how to properly use your diaphragm." She opened her eyes. "But your voice, there is something there worth cultivating." Relief flooded through Elena. "So you'll teach me?" "I will work with you," Greta corrected. "Teaching implies a passive recipient. What I do is more like collaboration. It requires equal effort from both sides." She moved to sit at the piano. "I charge $80 an hour. But for you, since Josephine sent you, I will charge $40. Elena's heart sank. Even at the reduced rate, lessons would quickly eat through her modest savings. "Ms. Novak, Greta," the older woman interrupted. "And before you tell me you cannot afford it, let me finish. $40 for the first month. After that, we will reassess." She fixed Elena with a stern look. "I do not waste my time on students who do not practice. If you work hard, we will find a way to continue." That first lesson was both exhausting and exhilarating. Greta was demanding but never cruel. She corrected Elena's posture, taught her breathing exercises, made her repeat simple scales until Elena's throat felt raw. By the end of the hour, Elena had a notebook full of exercises to practice and a newfound awareness of just how much she had to learn. 3 times a week, Greta said as Elena was leaving. "Monday and Thursday evenings, Saturday at noon. Do not be late and do not come unprepared." "I can't possibly afford 3 lessons a week," Elena protested. Greta waved a dismissive hand. "I said $40 for the month, not the lesson. I meant what I said about hard work." Her stern expression softened slightly. "You have 3 months until the symphony's fall season begins. If you are serious about this, we have no time to waste." And so began the most intense period of Elena's life. By day, she continued her work at the law firm. By night, she transformed into Greta's dedicated student. She practiced breathing exercises while washing dishes, sang scales while driving to work, recorded herself on her phone to catch mistakes Greta would surely notice. Luis was surprisingly accommodating. He did his homework in his room when she needed the living room to practice. He learned to heat up his own dinners on the nights she had lessons. Once Elena overheard him telling a friend on the phone, "Can't tonight. My mom's got this big singing thing she's working on. It's actually pretty cool." The weeks passed in a blur of exhaustion and gradual improvement. Elena's voice grew stronger, more controlled. She learned to read music properly, to understand the Italian terms that peppered the sheet music, to hear when she went sharp or flat. Greta was a taskmaster, but she was also a wealth of knowledge and experience. Sometimes in between exercises, she would tell Elena stories about her days singing in Europe, about famous conductors she had worked with, about the triumphs and disasters of life on stage. "Music is not just about the notes," she told Elena one evening as they worked on an aria that had been giving Elena trouble. "Anyone with enough practice can hit the right notes. Music is about what happens in the space between the notes. It's about what you bring from your life, your heart." One Saturday in early August, about 2 months into their lessons, Greta surprised Elena by asking about her long-term goals. "I hadn't really thought beyond improving my voice," Elena admitted. "Maybe joining a better church choir. Or a community chorus," Greta snorted. "Small thinking. Your voice is not meant for the back row of a church choir." She studied Elena for a moment. "The symphony is holding auditions again in September. For the fall season." Elena's heart jumped, then immediately sank. "No, I can't go through that again." "Maestro Keller." "Victor Keller is a small man with a large ego," Greta interrupted. "But he is not the only one who makes decisions at the symphony." She smiled, a rare occurrence that transformed her severe face. "Besides, I would very much enjoy the look on his face when he hears how far you've come. Do you really think I could be ready by September?" Elena asked, hope and doubt warring in her voice. "With the right piece, with enough practice?" "Yes." Greta handed her a folder. "This is what you will audition with." Inside was the sheet music for O mio babbino caro, the very piece Elena had failed to complete at her last audition. "Greta, I don't know if I can. You can and you will, Greta said firmly. Sometimes the only way past a fear is through it. Her blue eyes held Elena's. Trust me. Trust your voice. And so, as summer waned and September approached, Elena threw herself into mastering the piece that had once humiliated her. She practiced during lunch breaks after Luis went to bed, early in the morning before work. She recorded herself again and again, listening critically for flaws only she and Greta would notice. She told no one about her plan to audition again, not her coworkers, not even Luis. This time it was her secret, her private mission. She would face her fear, confront the memory of that moment on stage, and whatever happened, she would know she had given everything she had. September arrived with its hint of autumn crispness, bringing with it the audition notices for the symphony's fall season. Elena spotted the email during her lunch break and felt her stomach tighten. This was it. After 3 months of grueling practice, of stolen hours and tired mornings, the moment had arrived to decide. Would she try again? That evening, during her lesson with Greta, Elena's mind wandered, the notes on the page blurring as anxiety gnawed at her focus. Stop, Greta commanded, hitting a discordant note on the piano. You are not here today. Where is your mind? Elena sighed and placed her sheet music on the piano. The audition notices went out today. Greta's eyebrows rose slightly. And? You knew this was coming. I'm not sure if I should do it, Elena admitted. What if he humiliates me again? What if I've worked all this time just to fail in the exact same way? Greta was silent for a long moment, studying Elena with those piercing blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Then she stood up from the piano bench and walked to a cabinet in the corner of the room. She returned with a small wooden box which she placed on top of the piano. Open it, she said. Elena lifted the lid. Inside were newspaper clippings, yellowed with age, and a collection of small objects, a dried rose, a ticket stub, a small silver brooch shaped like a music note. Vienna, 1972, Greta said, pointing to one of the clippings. My first major role with the Vienna State Opera. I was the understudy for the lead soprano in La Bohème. She became ill and suddenly I was thrust onto the stage. Elena looked at the black and white photo accompanying the article. A young Greta, her hair long and dark back then, stood center stage in period costume, her expression radiant. The critics said I had a voice like a nightingale. Greta continued. It was the beginning of my career. She picked up another clipping. Budapest, 1975, I was booed off the stage. What? Elena couldn't hide her shock. Why? I had been very successful very quickly. Perhaps it went to my head. I did not prepare properly for a difficult role. I thought my talent would carry me through. Greta's mouth twisted in a wry smile. It did not. The audience was merciless. I did not finish the aria. The parallel to Elena's own experience was unmistakable. What did you do? I cried for 3 days, Greta said simply. And then I went back to work. 6 months later, I performed the same role in Prague and received a standing ovation. She closed the box gently. The difference between success and failure is often just time and determination. Elena looked at the box, then at her teacher. Were you scared when you went back on stage? Terrified, Greta admitted. But I had something to prove, not just to the audience, but to myself. She fixed Elena with a stern look. So the audition. Will you register, or will you let Victor Keller's opinion define the limits of your life? Put that way, the choice seemed obvious. Elena took a deep breath. I'll register. Good, Greta nodded approvingly. Now, from the beginning, and this time, be present. The next week was a whirlwind of preparation. Elena registered for the audition, selecting a time slot that would allow her to slip away from work without taking a full day off. She practiced O mio babbino caro until she could sing it in her sleep, focusing on the trouble spots Greta had identified. 3 days before the audition, Elena finally told Luis. They were washing dishes after dinner, Luis drying while Elena washed when she casually mentioned it. By the way, I have another audition on Friday. Luis nearly dropped the plate he was drying. For real? With the same people who were jerks last time? Elena nodded, keeping her eyes on the soapy water. The same symphony, yes. Including that Maestro guy? Probably. Luis was quiet for a moment, methodically drying the plate. Then he said, You're gonna crush it this time. Elena looked up, surprised by his certainty. How do you know? He shrugged. Because you've been working super hard. I hear you practicing all the time and… He hesitated, suddenly looking embarrassed. I kind of recorded you the other day. On my phone. You sounded amazing. You recorded me? Elena was torn between being touched and mortified. Just for me to listen to, Luis assured her quickly. I wouldn't share it or anything weird like that. I'm proud of you, Mom. Not many people would try again after what happened. Elena felt a lump form in her throat. She put down the dish she was washing and pulled her son into a damp, soapy hug. Thank you, Luis. That means more than you know. Friday arrived with stunning clarity, one of those perfect early autumn days when the sky seems impossibly blue. Elena went to work as usual but left at lunch, claiming a doctor's appointment. She changed in the bathroom of a coffee shop near the Symphony Hall, swapping her work clothes for a simple navy blue dress that Greta had approved as appropriate but not trying too hard. The Symphony Hall looked the same as it had months ago, but Elena felt different walking through its doors. Not confident exactly, her stomach was still a knot of nerves, but purposeful. She had earned her right to be here. This time, the auditions were being held in the main concert hall rather than the smaller auditorium. Elena was directed to a waiting area backstage where a handful of other hopefuls sat, some reviewing sheet music, others doing quiet vocal warm-ups. She didn't see Priya or any other familiar faces from her previous auditions. A young man with a clipboard approached her. Elena Reyes. She nodded. You're up in about 10 minutes. You can warm up in room 3 if you'd like. Elena thanked him and found the small practice room he'd indicated. She went through the warm-up exercises Greta had taught her, focusing on her breathing, on the sensation of the notes resonating in her chest and head. Center yourself, Greta always said. Your body is your instrument. All too soon, she was being led onto the vast stage of the concert hall. The space was dimly lit, with only the stage area fully illuminated. In the darkened orchestra seats, Elena could make out a small group of people, the selection committee. Her heart sped up as she recognized Maestro Keller's distinctive silhouette in the center. Elena Reyes, announced the young man with the clipboard, performing O mio babino caro. There was a rustle of papers from the darkness, then Maestro Keller's voice as cold as she remembered it. Weren't you here before? Elena swallowed hard. Yes, sir. About 4 months ago. I remember, he said, and there was something like amusement in his tone that made Elena's cheeks burn. Well, let's see if you've improved. The piano accompanist gave Elena an encouraging smile as she took her position. This was a different person from her last audition, an older woman with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She played the opening notes, and Elena took a breath. This time was different. Elena felt the music flowing through her, felt her voice soaring into the vast space of the concert hall. The months of training with Greta had transformed not just her technique but her confidence. She knew this piece intimately now, understood the longing and pleading in the lyrics, the emotional journey of the young girl begging her father for a chance at love. And maybe that was it. She understood something now about begging for a chance, about wanting something so badly you'd risk humiliation for it. She poured that understanding into every note, every phrase. When the final note faded, there was silence. Elena stood still, heart pounding, waiting for Maestro Keller's verdict. Would he dismiss her again? Tell her she was wasting their time? Instead, a different voice spoke from the darkness. Thank you, Ms. Reyes, that was lovely. Elena recognized Josephine Torres's warm tone. Relief flooded through her. If you could wait outside, please, Josephine continued. We'll be making decisions shortly. As Elena left the stage, she caught sight of Maestro Keller's face in the dim light. He wasn't smiling, but his expression was thoughtful, perhaps even a little surprised. He had noticed the difference. Whether it would be enough remained to be seen. In the waiting area, Elena checked her phone. A text from Luis, knock 'em dead, Mom, and another from Greta, which surprised her since her teacher rarely texted. Remember to breathe. She smiled, tucking the phone away. Whatever happened next, she had already accomplished something important. She had faced her fear. She had refused to give up. An hour crawled by. The other auditioners were called in one by one to hear the committee's decision. Some emerged looking pleased, others fighting back tears. Finally, the young man with the clipboard called Elena's name. He walked back onto the stage, hands clasped to keep them from shaking. This time, most of the lights were on, and she could see the selection committee clearly. Josephine, two men she didn't recognize, and Maestro Keller, his expression unreadable. Josephine spoke first. "Ms. Reyes, we were quite impressed with your performance." Hope fluttered in Elena's chest. However, Josephine continued, "We have limited spots available for the fall season." Elena's heart sank. This was a rejection, just delivered more kindly than last time. "But," Josephine's eyes twinkled, "we do have an immediate need for a vocalist for our community outreach program. One of our sopranos has taken a leave of absence, and we need someone to perform a series of educational concerts for local schools. Would you be interested?" Elena stood stunned. "Yes," she managed to say. "Yes, I would be very interested." "Excellent," Josephine smiled. "It's not the main concert series, but it's a foot in the door. And if all goes well—" "Thank you," Elena said, unable to keep the emotion from her voice. "Thank you so much." As she left the stage, Elena caught Maestro Keller watching her. He didn't smile or nod, but there was a new awareness in his gaze. Not approval exactly, but recognition. She had proven something to him, and perhaps more importantly to herself. Outside the symphony hall, Elena stood on the steps for a moment, letting the reality of what had just happened sink in. Then she pulled out her phone and made 2 calls. First to Luis, who whooped so loudly she had to hold the phone away from her ear, and then to Greta, who listened to the news in characteristic silence before saying simply, "Good. Now the real work begins." Elena smiled as she walked to her car. The real work. She was ready for it. The next 2 months flew by in a whirlwind of activity. Elena's new role with the community outreach program meant rehearsals 3 evenings a week, and performances most Friday mornings at local schools. Somehow she juggled it all. Her day job at the law firm, her responsibilities to Luis, and her new life as a vocalist with the regional symphony orchestra. It wasn't the main concert series, as Josephine had made clear, but Elena found unexpected joy in performing for children. Their unfiltered enthusiasm when she hit a particularly impressive note. Their wide eyes when the string section swelled behind her. It was a different kind of reward than the polite applause of an adult audience. "You're good with the kids," Josephine commented after a particularly successful performance at an elementary school in a low-income neighborhood. "They respond to you." Elena smiled, watching as a group of children gathered around the cellist asking to touch his instrument. "They haven't learned to hide their emotions yet. There's something freeing about performing for people who aren't judging your technique." "Speaking of technique," Josephine said, lowering her voice slightly, "you've improved remarkably since your audition." "Greta Novak's influence, I assume?" Elena nodded. She still had lessons with Greta twice a week, fitting them in on her one free evening and Saturday afternoons. The older woman had adjusted her teaching to focus on the specific pieces Elena needed for the outreach program. But she remained as demanding as ever. "She's a taskmaster," Elena admitted. "But an effective one." "She always was," Josephine said with a fond smile. "We studied together, many years ago in New York. Even then, she never accepted anything less than excellence, from herself or anyone else." As they packed up to leave, Josephine placed a hand on Elena's arm. "The Winter Gala is coming up," she said. "It's our biggest fundraiser of the year. Very fancy, very important for the symphony's budget." "I've heard the other musicians talking about it," Elena said. The gala was apparently the social event of the season for the city's arts patrons, held in the grand ballroom of the historic Belmont Hotel. "We usually showcase our principal musicians," Josephine continued. "But I've been thinking, the outreach program deserves some recognition too." Her eyes twinkled. "How would you feel about performing a solo piece?" Elena's heart skipped a beat. "At the gala? With all the donors and board members there?" "And critics," Josephine added. "And Maestro Keller, of course." At the mention of the maestro, Elena felt a familiar flutter of anxiety. Since joining the outreach program, she had seen him only in passing. He had neither praised nor criticized her, treating her with the same cool professionalism he showed to all the musicians who weren't part of his primary orchestra. "I don't know," Elena said hesitantly. "That's a big step up from performing for 3rd graders. Think about it," Josephine urged. "It would be just one piece, 5 minutes at most. But it could be a significant opportunity." She squeezed Elena's arm gently. "You're ready for this, whether you know it or not. That evening, Elena mentioned the gala invitation to Greta during her lesson. "Of course you'll do it," Greta said immediately. "This is exactly the opportunity we've been working toward." "But in front of all those people," Elena began. "Audiences are audiences," Greta interrupted, waving a dismissive hand. "Whether it's children or critics, your job remains the same, to sing with technical precision and emotional truth." She fixed Elena with her piercing gaze. "Unless you're afraid of Victor Keller?" "No," Elena said, surprising herself with her own certainty. "Not anymore." Greta's stern face softened into a rare smile. "Good. Then we have work to do." They spent the next 3 weeks preparing a single piece, O mio babino caro, the aria that had become something of a talisman for Elena. Under Greta's guidance, she refined her interpretation, finding new layers of meaning, new opportunities to showcase her growing technical skill. "The gala is in 2 days," Greta announced at the end of their final rehearsal. "Tomorrow you will rest your voice completely. No singing, minimal talking. And no coffee," she added sternly. "Yes, ma'am," Elena said with a mock salute that earned her a raised eyebrow from her teacher. "You are not nervous enough," Greta observed. "This concerns me," Elena laughed. "Would you prefer me to be a wreck?" "A certain amount of nerves is useful. It sharpens the senses." Greta studied her for a moment. "But perhaps you truly are ready." The night of the gala arrived cold and clear, stars visible in the winter sky as Elena drove downtown to the Belmont Hotel. Luis had helped her get ready, offering surprisingly astute opinions on which earrings looked best with her dress. A floor-length gown in deep emerald green that Diane from work had lent her for the occasion. "You look like a movie star, Mom," Luis had said when she emerged from her bedroom fully dressed. Then, in typical teenage fashion, he'd immediately tried to downplay his compliment. "I mean, you know, for someone your age." Selena smiled at the memory as she handed her car keys to the valet. Inside the hotel, she followed the sound of music and conversation to the grand ballroom, a space of soaring ceilings and crystal chandeliers. Round tables draped in white linen filled the room, surrounded by men in tuxedos and women in evening gowns. At the far end, a small stage had been set up where a string quartet was currently playing. "Elena!" Josephine waved from near the stage. She looked elegant in a silver gown, her gray hair swept up in a sophisticated updo. "You're here and you look wonderful." "I feel a bit out of place," Elena admitted, glancing around at the wealthy donors who made up most of the guest list. "Nonsense. You belong here as much as anyone," Josephine said firmly. "Now you're on after the string quartet. About 30 minutes from now. The accompanist has your music. Do you want to run through it once with him?" The next half hour passed in a blur as Elena warmed up in a small anteroom, then met briefly with the accompanist, a distinguished older man who put her at ease with his quiet professionalism. Too soon she was standing in the wings, listening as Josephine took the stage to introduce her. "Our outreach program is one of the symphony's proudest achievements," Josephine was saying. "Through it, we bring the joy of classical music to thousands of children who might otherwise never experience a live orchestral performance. Tonight I'm delighted to introduce one of our newest vocalists, a woman whose journey to our symphony has been unconventional, but inspiring. Please welcome Elena Reyes." Applause rippled through the ballroom as Elena walked onto the stage. The lights were bright, making it difficult to see the audience clearly, but as her eyes adjusted, she picked out familiar faces. Josephine, beaming proudly from the side of the stage. Greta sitting ramrod straight at a table near the front, and Maestro Keller, his expression impassive as ever, at a table with what appeared to be board members. Elena nodded to the accompanist, who began the familiar introduction to O mio babino caro. As she had done countless times in rehearsal, Elena counted the measures, took a breath, and began to sing. From the first note, she knew something was different. The acoustics in the ballroom were magnificent, allowing her voice to soar and fill the space without strain. But it was more than that. There was a freedom in her performance tonight, a sense of joy that transcended technique or training. This was why she sang, not for applause or recognition, but for moments like this when music became something more than notes on a page. The aria was brief, less than 3 minutes, but in that time, Elena felt as though she were telling the story of her own journey. The longing, the pleading, the determination to be heard and understood, All of it resonated with her own experience over the past 6 months. As she held the final note, letting it fade gently into silence, Elena opened her eyes to see the entire room on its feet. The applause was immediate and thunderous, filling the ballroom with a wave of sound that washed over her like a physical force. Through tears that suddenly blurred her vision, Elena saw Greta nod once, a gesture of approval more meaningful than any standing ovation. Josephine was applauding wildly, pride evident in every line of her face. And then Elena's gaze found Maestro Keller. He too was on his feet, his usually stern expression transformed by what looked remarkably like respect. When their eyes met, he inclined his head slightly, not quite a bow, but an acknowledgement, a concession that he had been wrong about her. The applause continued as Elena bowed, a smile breaking across her face that she couldn't have suppressed if she tried. She had done it. Not just survived, but triumphed. Not just proven Maestro Keller wrong, but proven herself right. As she left the stage, people reached out to touch her arm, to offer congratulations. A critic from the city's main newspaper asked for her name, spelled correctly, please. A donor wanted to know if she would be performing in the main concert series soon. Through it all, Elena felt a strange sense of calm, as if she were watching herself from a distance. This was lovely, this moment of recognition. But it wasn't why she had worked so hard. She had done it for the music, for the joy of discovering a part of herself that had been dormant for too long. Josephine found her as the crowd began to disperse, returning to their tables for dessert. That was extraordinary, Elena, truly. She squeezed Elena's hands. I've already had 3 board members ask why you aren't in the main concert series. What did you tell them? Elena asked. Josephine's eyes twinkled. That it was only a matter of time. She glanced over Elena's shoulder. And speaking of time, I believe someone wants to talk to you. Elena turned to see Maestro Keller approaching, his expression guarded but not unfriendly. Josephine discreetly moved away, leaving them alone. Ms. Reyes, he said, his voice formal but lacking its usual edge. That was quite remarkable. Thank you, Maestro Keller, Elena replied, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. He hesitated, then continued. I may have been hasty in my assessment of your potential. Coming from him, it was as close to an apology as she was likely to get. Elena nodded, accepting it for what it was. We have an opening for a vocalist in our spring series, he said. Josephine speaks highly of your work ethic. If you're interested, we could discuss repertoire next week. I would be honored, Elena said simply. After he walked away, Greta appeared at Elena's side. Well? The older woman demanded. What did he say? Oh, I am, Elena assured her. It's just... She paused, trying to articulate what she was feeling. 6 months ago, I would have thought this was the ultimate validation. Maestro Keller's approval, a spot in the main concert series. But now I realize the real victory happened long before tonight. When? Greta asked. The moment I decided to try again despite the fear, Elena said. The moment I chose not to let one person's opinion define me. Greta's usually stern face softened into a genuine smile. Now you understand what it means to be an artist. She linked her arm when Elena told her. Greta snorted. Victor never could admit when he was wrong, but this is as close as he comes. She studied Elena's face. You are not as excited as I expected, through Elena's. Come, let us get some champagne. We have earned it, I think. As they walked through the glittering crowd, Elena caught sight of herself reflected in one of the ballroom's grand mirrors, a woman in a green dress with a quiet confidence in her bearing that hadn't been there 6 months ago. Not a famous diva, not a world-renowned soprano, just an ordinary woman who had found her voice in more ways than one, and that, she realized, was extraordinary enough.